Hey everybody, welcome to another episode from Ampro Engineering, and in this episode we are going to take a standard Tamiya Hornet. This one may have some upgrades, but you get the idea, a standard Tamiya Hornet, and we are going to install this cage. It is more than cosmetic. In fact, this was designed solely to be a structural addition to the Hornet chassis. Being that it bolts to the Grasshopper body mount locations, this is not compatible with the Grasshopper. It is only designed for a Hornet and will fit under the standard Hornet body. This particular car is the Hornet that I have at the office. It has some upgrades. I've got my 20mm offset front suspension, the battery door, the transmission brace, as well as the rear suspension mount. Most importantly, it has the wing mount. You will need the wing mount in order to fully utilize this roll cage. We'll begin now. I went ahead and removed the rear wing, and we'll pull the body off. And you can see that this does have the rear wing mounts removed. In this case here, the original ones were destroyed, so this is why they've been cut off. This body came on a parts car quite a while ago. As you can see at the rear, I do have the Ampro rear wing mount and upper shock mount. You are more than welcome to use a version of this that does not have the rear wing mount and is simply the rear shock mount. Again, this is important because the rear of the cage will join just like that and create a monocoque design and reinforce the entire chassis from the front to the rear of the car. This is why this piece is necessary. The hardest part of this entire installation is going to be making sure that everything fits in the car. Now, this is the first time I'm trying this. It looks like the receiver is in the way. The speed control looks to be okay. The servo is not going to have a problem at all unless you've got some giant servo. This is designed to fit completely around the servo without getting in the way. I wanted to point out that although this car does have the Ampro 20mm offset front suspension, that it is not necessary for this roll cage. However, if you do have either the 0 or the 20mm offset suspension, you can remove the upper control pivot and simply use this mounting point here on this roll cage. If your car has the cosmetic upper control link, you do not want to use this roll cage because I do not offer this piece here for the cosmetic version of the upper link because, as I mentioned with the upper link, it is very weak. This is designed for a vehicle that is going to be more significantly used than a shelf queen or a lightly driven car. So in terms of preparation, I did remove the receiver, so that's out of here. And I scooted the speed control back just slightly because I am going to have the driver in this car, and the driver is going to sit a little bit lower because he now, or she, sits right there. Additional preparation had to do with pulling out the top screw for the Nerf bar and making sure that the MSC mount is all cleared out. If your car does have a mechanical speed control, sorry about it. This cage requires this mounting point as this is one of the most rigid places on the chassis for impact. So this car must use this mounting point here for the roll cage. So this requires an electric speed control. First things first, let's go ahead and install the cage. Now I'm going to go ahead and slide it down at the rear. You're going to see here that there's two little pegs, 1 and 2, on this upper suspension mount. So there are a couple versions of this wing slash upper suspension mount. Almost all of the ones ever sold are this more modern style here, where you have the pegs on the outside and the screw holes on the inside. This one here is fairly early, and some of you may own this one here. You can see that this is still going to fit. The problem is that the pegs and the holes are reversed. So at this point here, I have no way of actually using these mounts. So my plan here is simply to install a dowel pin there and a dowel pin here and slide that right in there. The dowel pin is going to keep the upper mount lined up with the cage so that upon impact, when this pushes up, it hits the cage and keeps everything nice and tight. So if you do own the early version, you are okay. The later version, which again is probably a lot more common, will allow you to actually screw into it. So most of you are going to have this later piece. This one here is the version without the wing mount. You can see that there. It is also going to allow you can see at the rear, which is why it's kind of so long, it will allow you to use the Ampro Omega double wishbone rear suspension for the Hornet as well. So both the suspension and the cage will require either this or the standard wing mount. Let's go ahead and slip this in here. And again, just make sure everything's gonna fit nicely. That is in there. I mean, it's really not a very complicated installation. As long as you get that in, we are all set. At this point here, I'm gonna cut the camera in a second, just kind of install my receiver. I think I'm gonna stuff it right in here somewhere. Well, we're gonna see if I can find some room for it. I installed the ball studs on the front part of the roll cage, and it's very important that you thread them into some nuts at the rear. This plastic is not designed to be tapped into, and you don't want to rely on this for the structural integrity of the ball stud. I'm very embarrassed here that you see the receiver installation at a strange angle, but unfortunately, due to its bulk, there is no room for me to properly install it, so I'm gonna have to live with that, unfortunately. There it is. It is basically done. At the front, you want to install some M3 self-tapping screws that are a length of 8 millimeters. So we want to back thread these. Just thread it till it stops. You don't need to torque the ABS. It's not going to withstand that. So there it is, stopped. Front is installed. Next, if I was able to on this shock mount here, I would thread this part in right here. As you can see, there are a couple of holes on the correct ones now, and just make sure that you do clean these out with a 2.5 millimeter drill bit. For the resistor mount, you can use a couple of self-tapping screws, and then we have to do these rear mounting holes next. So we'll thread that in there. This next bit here is my least favorite part of the build. Although there are no cuts or anything difficult in terms of the installation here, you do have to somehow jam this screw into the Nerf bar. And in my case, I am running a vintage metal Nerf bar. So that's going to mean, oh, I dropped it. That means I have to use a machine screw. So let me try this like so. Fortunately, with the magic of video editing, this is going to look really easy to you, but I assure you, it is not. Depending on your ESC placement, this could be a fairly simple operation. As you can see here, my ESC is smack dab in the middle of everything that I'm trying to do, so this is going to be a nightmare. Well, I did finally get that in. I had to move the speed control just because of the heat sinks being in the way, but they're in. The Nerf bars are all set. The next bit that we're going to do is install this little mount right here. We're going to put a 12 millimeter self-tapping screw with a washer and just drop it right in here. Just a little side note, it took me quite a bit of trial and error to get all the mounting holes correct on this thing. Due to age, wear and tear, whether it's an original or whether a re-release, I found that some of the mounting holes can alter their position by maybe as much as a millimeter or so. This one here tends to be kind of a pain in the butt. This car, everything was spot on. On Superfly 2.0, the front mounts were off by 0.5 millimeter, and on Superfly 1.0, everything was perfect except for the resistor mounts, which were off by 1 millimeter. So again, it has to do with just deviation in the plastic. So just note, you may need to do just a little bit of squeezing to get the cage on, but overall it should be a pretty simple installation. The last thing we have to do is the 3 mounts for the center pivots here that are from the original mechanical speed control mounts. For these, we're going to use 2 screws on the outside and 1 on the center. The outer ones have a very, very shallow depth in here. There's only 4 millimeters of depth on the roll cage just because of the geometry. The center can be as long as you want. So I'm going to put a 12 millimeter in there. And for the outer 2, I'm going to take 2 12 millimeter self-tapping screws and simply cut them down to about 5 millimeters. For this central one, you want to go ahead and just, I do this kind of back and forth. What that's doing is cutting the threads nice and deep into the nylon. You want to make sure that all of these holes have been drilled out with a 2.5 millimeter drill bit. And when it stops, it stops. Those 3 mounts are installed. For most of you, you're going to be done. For those of you that do have one of the double wishbone front suspension setups for the Hornet, you are going to have to hook up the upper links. Very important that you don't simply push down right here. You don't want to put a cantilever load on the arm in that area because it's not designed to take that kind of stress. And the last thing you want to do is do all this work and force this thing on and overstress it and break the mount for the ball end. The lower part of the pliers is sitting on the nut on the back side of the ball stud. And pop it in. We do have a driver, so let me snag the driver and put him in. Nothing too special about the driver installation. It would be installed the exact same way you would do it on the car, body. The comical bit about this is the driver straddles the speed control just perfectly. So now our driver is in there, our cage is mounted, our receiver is very poorly installed. I'm going to wire this thing up and we'll set the body on. Everything has been wired up and the cage is installed. Really, it's pretty straightforward. You just need a couple extra of the self-tapping Tamiya screws and you'll get the cage in. Once it's installed, you're going to find that the chassis rigidity is significantly higher. And the reason is now a number of the chassis mounting points for the grasshopper body, the two at the front and the two at the rear, as well as the old mechanical speed control servo mount, as well as the mechanical speed control itself, that original mount, have all been taken up with structural load-bearing entities. Looking at the cage here, you do see it's blue. Unfortunately, Shapeways doesn't have the ability to dye something of this size, so the only available colors you're going to find are black and white. The beauty is this nylon paints ridiculously well. Once you get it in there, it is embedded deeply and it's very, very hard to scrape off. This is a outdoor plastic paint. I think it's Krylon, and I simply grabbed a blue that I had with me. The color match wasn't great, but honestly, I didn't try. I just wanted something blue, as the dominant paint scheme on this car is more blue, so that's why I picked that color. The next bit here is I think we all want to see if the body fits. This is the first time that you're seeing this with the cage screwed onto the chassis, so let's find out if all of my design here was accurate or not. Let's spin that around. Okay, we're going to align the body mount post at the rear and at the front, stuff that on there. We'll put the body pin in here. At the rear, you're going to see that you now want to use the upper body pin, as the cage will come into contact with the inside of the body if you try and go all the way down. I'll show it to you here. If you try and shove it all the way down, you're going to see this part of the body bowing up. You don't want to do that, so just screw it into the top one there. Add a couple of washers to secure the body, and you'll be all set. And the reason for that is because of some clearance with the screw mounts for the wing mount, as well as the MSC mount. That's why this one always had those tandem mounts there. The wing's been installed. You can see the body is all on, and check it out. See the little cage in there? I guess it maybe would look better if I painted it silver or chrome, but you know, I just figured let's just do it blue. Why not? There is about 4 millimeters of space between the top of the roof and the top of the cage. The reason I left that way is I plan on putting a small piece of adhesive foam on the inside of the body, so that in the event that the car flips over, the load is distributed nice and evenly along the top of the body and the inside of the cage. The reason why I didn't design those to touch is that would actually damage the body more than if the foam would take the impact. Well, there it is, the complete roll cage for the Tamiya Hornet. Remember that the double wishbone suspension is not a prerequisite. You only need the cage. Part number is on the screen right now, as well as the rear shock and wing mount, or the rear shock mount. I hope you enjoyed that video. We can see that the standard Hornet cage and the Superfly Hornet cage are a nice addition to the cars. I really like them. Again, you know, I think that these really reinforce the chassis, and it's going to dramatically reduce the amount of stress that's on the front of the car where they usually do crack. Also, might as well show you something real quick here. There's Project Poison Dart. If anybody hasn't been following this particular project on Tamiya Club, here it is. Quickly painted the body. My rule of thumb for runner bodies is about a half an hour from cutting to painting, and this was a little bit longer than that because the masking of the roll cage took significantly longer, and I also went ahead and added these stripes because I can't help myself. The stripes are Tamiya masking tape. In fact, the width of the stripe is the 10mm and the 6mm Tamiya masking tape. Very, very simple, very quick. Notice I did not install the auxiliary lights there. They are going to be installed in the front. Speaking of auxiliary lights, we have some new ones coming out. There is a good reason why I have designed my own fog lights for these cars, or auxiliary lights, and you'll be seeing those in the coming next couple of weeks. So Project Poison Dart, you can see, does have the new double wishbone rear suspension, as well as all the other bits I've created for the ORV cars, except for these arms, which I simply forgot to install. There's some other tidbits like the rear wing mount up here, so now that wing is never going to break off again. It's nicely installed. Car runs like a champ, and I cannot wait to take this to the track, along with Superfly 2.0, the King Cab, and a variety of other cars. Some updates for the King Cab. You can see that it is going to get this nifty front bumper. There is a version of this with and without the auxiliary light mounts. This piece right here, there's a version of this that is made out of an elastic material, so that in the event of a front end collision, it does not distribute all of the load to that front chassis mount and break it. And there is also a little skid plate here. You can see it's been tested a bit and very nicely took all the damage. I've also got some battery holders that'll be coming out very soon, as well as a complete new body mount set for this truck. This has also got to go to the track, as I've been messing with the Ampro rear suspension, as well as the spectacular RCC associated stealth installation kit. That was just the best thing that could have ever happened to the King Cab. I absolutely love that whole setup. Anyway, I could keep talking for the next half an hour. I'm not going to do that to you, so I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet already, please follow me on Instagram as well as Facebook. I'm Ampro Engineering on both. And before you take off, check out the band Blue Pinto. They, as usual, let me use their songs on all of my videos, and a link to their Facebook page is in the end credits. Remember that if you are interested in any of the parts that you have seen here, the link to Ampro Engineering on Shapeways is also in the end credits, and all of the part numbers as well as links to the parts are in the description. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.